Welcome to Mission Imperfect, the podcast about finding your own path, your own way, and embracing the imperfection of the journey.
We're your hosts, life coaches, former HR professionals, and mums, Kirsty and Kathryn.
We love to discuss the topics that come up time and time again for our coaching clients and which affect us all, from things like acceptance and boundaries to values and well-being and everything in between.
Each episode ends with a question for you and us to reflect on. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to grab a cuppa and a biscuit and join us in getting lost in finding ourselves. Hello and welcome to Mission Imperfect. This week we have a juicy topic, I feel, and one that I have certainly struggled with and continue to struggle with, if I'm being honest, and that is decision making. So, Kathryn, I know that you've got a lot of good thoughts on this.
Thank you. Yes, well, to be honest with you, Kirsty, I think we all struggle at times with making decisions. I think we actually struggle more with the making part than sometimes we do with the actual outcome part of the decision. It's
The actual
if we're
doing.
making it, we feel incapable of making it. It drives us mad. But the truth is, in life, we've got to make, there's a series of choices and decisions. We're not purely at the mercy of all these things that are beyond our control. There is a lot beyond our control, but of course we do have some influence over our destiny and our direction, and we do make these decisions and choices. And I was laughing about this. I thought it's the part of adulting that we thought as a kid that we're going to love having control, ice cream for dinner,
Yay.
because of course that's the extent of decision making for adults, isn't it? What you're going to have for dinner, and it could be ice cream, and I could stay up till whenever I like, and not actually have a
Not do
job or
my
anything like
homework.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not do my homework. So yeah, if not having to worry about actually where income might come from or any of those things. But so yes, as much as we'd love it to be just about, do I have ice cream for dinner or not, when we are adults and we realize perhaps that's not as desirable as we thought it might be, and there are actually far more important decisions we have to make, they're the things that sometimes we think, oh God, I'm really struggling to make these decisions. And I think it's because we have some thinking traps that we fall into, which I'm going to come on to.
Ooh, thinking traps.
Mm. And I think
Intriguing.
it is the thing, and it's, as you said, Kirsty, so because we realize our decisions have consequences, and when they aren't always that favorable, we then go back to, well, I made the wrong decision. We want to be sure that we're going to make the right decision.
Yeah.
This is probably the first troublesome part, because we can't. That's the short answer of it, I'm afraid. You can't
Oh
always
no.
know. Exactly. Dun,
Don't
dun,
don't
dun.
tell me that. Don't tell me that. That's going to make it
you
worse.
you can't be sure of making the right decision. Um, and that leads us into these. Have you heard the phrase analysis paralysis? I think that's a
Yes.
great
I
phrase. I
have.
only came across this when I started coaching, and it made perfect sense to me, because you're trying to analyze all the outcomes to guarantee the one that you want. And it kind of can keep you going round in a circle because you can't guarantee it. And then we end up
Yep.
basically not making a decision.
And if,
But
if you're a
that's
bit prone,
actually,
so I was going to say, if you're a bit prone to overthinking anyway, that analysis paralysis is
yeah,
thing, isn't it? Sorry, I
really,
interrupted
really.
you there.
No, that's right. It's a real nuisance, because basically that is the first thinking trap that we
Oh,
sometimes forget, that if you don't make a decision, that is actually in fact still also a choice.
oh,
It means that the outcome or the result is going to remain as it stands currently, including whether that's desirable or not. So the fact that you
okay.
haven't yet, you think you've not decided, I almost call it like the default position, because it'll just stay as is
So
when
in
you're not making a conscious choice for it to be something different. You're actually making a choice, whether conscious or not, for it to stay as it is. So that's
so
my first thinking trap.
you've effectively decided not to decide.
Yeah. Like, I'm just trying to think of an example for this to make sense.
Mm,
If you're perhaps debating, I think we'd like to move house because I think we need to get into a more desirable school catchment area, for example, but then you're debating and laboring over where's that going to be, what's the right area, what's the right school, all of those things, valid points. But then if you don't make that choice, you're going to stay with the option that you currently have. You haven't
Yeah.
actually perhaps a different one would be is if you looked into it and realized actually we are in the catchment area for X school and that suits us, and we will, that's a conscious yes, I will stay with the option I currently have, as opposed to it being the default one. And that's probably not the best example, because I think you've got quite a tangible outcome to work towards. I think it's a lot more sneaky when it's the sort of less tangible outputs on the decision. But what I'm saying is, when we don't make a choice, the default is what we already have. And I think sometimes people overlook that as being one of the outcomes of not making a decision. I hope that makes sense.
It does, yes. So even if we fail to make a decision about what action to take, then we are deciding in favor of what we've already got,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. And maybe that isn't guaranteed to stay at its current level.
Mm.
Obviously, it depends on what that decision is regarding. Maybe that's not also a certainty. And I know I'm saying we can't guarantee things, but we can try to improve our chances with conscious. I think the point I'm trying to make is, I guess, about making conscious choices for what we think we want and trying to get there, as opposed to it being a very passive default, which which we may rely on things staying as they are as well, which they may not. So that's the kind of point I'm making. And going back to this idea of not being able to foresee the future, sadly, I'm
Mm.
afraid, no matter how much we like to try and predict and preempt and prepare, and I'm not saying all those things are sort of invalid. I think being prepared is important. It's just not a guarantee. And we get obsessed with this kind of idea of the right decision, which I think is a little bit unfair, a bit pressurized. So my view is that we make a decision, and try to make it as best informed as you can, but maybe accept, if needs be, we choose again in the future.
Oh yeah, I mean this is bringing up quite a lot for me actually around how we get very attached to the outcome we want from a decision.
Mm.
Make And we do try and read the future. We think that making a decision is kind of determining the future when maybe it's simply possibly influencing
Yeah.
future.
I mean, hopefully it is, and positive. Like I said, that's where the best informed bit comes in. We
Yeah,
try and plug gaps in that knowledge, like using that school example, look into the catchment areas, what's happened in previous years, look at the offset, all those things that might build a picture for you and
yeah.
help you make that best informed decision, but accepting that things aren't necessarily a guarantee and you may have to choose again. I think because life is that series of moving through our decisions in these chapters that we have in our lives. And I think sometimes we forget that too. We think this is trap number 3, that we make the decision, it's set in stone, and we have to live by it forever. And it's rare that it's a permanent outcome that we get from decisions. Hopefully we get to act and choose again. So taking the
Yeah.
example, you take a really brave decision to say you move abroad for a job offer, and you did all your research, you looked into the company, the opportunity, all of those things, and perhaps you go for it and it turns out, for whatever reason, unexpectedly, you hate it. And yes, it's a shame, and yes, maybe your pride is going to be dented because maybe you told everybody, I'm off to the other side of the world for this job, and then you
It's going to be
decide,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, and obviously you did so in good faith and you hoped that it would be. But if it turns out it wasn't the case, well, you choose what to do. Here's a really good example of the default is you stay even though you don't want to, whereas you could move back, you could move somewhere else, you could choose another path. I think decisions are very rarely a sort of once and done type scenario.
I think that there is something sort of cultural around that though. I mean, at time of speaking, we are not far out from the latest UK general election that's just happened. And certainly in politics, the idea of changing your mind is treated with sort of disdain and scorn. And, U-turn is, that's not never meant positively, is it? It's
No, that's a really good point. And yet, it's funny, I feel a lot more comfortable now. And I think perhaps this is partly through coaching. I personally think it's a lot more damaging to stay with decisions out of some kind of misguided guilt or whatever it might be, loyalty, whatever it might be, that I have to, because I'm a bit like, well, who
yeah.
says that I have to? As long as I'm comfortable with that decision and I believe I'm acting in my best interest, hopefully my family's best interest, that's actually the most important thing. I mean, I can't see is what you say about a U-turn in politics. It's very frustrating when they seem to endorse one policy and then flip completely the other way, without sort of rhyme or reason. I don't think we're talking quite in those terms. We're talking about situations that are personally affecting us. We
Yeah.
acted in good faith, using that job one as an example, and it just didn't turn out to be what we
Mm.
hoped. But we'd had the courage to perhaps give it a try and see in the first place that it
See,
was.
there's something here that ties back to something we talked about recently around failure, isn't there? That so
Mm.
often we can see a situation where we made a decision which has turned out not to be as we hoped it would. That can be seen as failure, and it can be difficult for people to acknowledge that and act on it. Whereas in actual fact, it's simply they found a path that wasn't right for them, and now they're looking for another one.
Yeah, and there's a sense of sometimes I think that is going to happen,
Yeah,
actually.
of
We
course it
talked about
is.
some of the inevitability, didn't we, about failure in that episode? Because I think, let's be honest, reflect on all of our lives to date. Chances are it's not been all smooth sailing, even if overall, hopefully, touch wood, there's been a good trajectory. There were going to have been those bumps in the road. And I think that's also true of our decisions. And yet we put this huge pressure on ourselves, which can then lead us into this spiral of procrastinating, analysis paralysis, being held and falling into these thinking traps. So,
Yeah.
just to recap, trap number one was perhaps not making a decision, but that also being a choice. Trap number two was about foreseeing the future, trying to predict what
Mhm.
will definitely happen, but we can't quite do that. Number three was about the permanence of those outcomes of our decisions. And number four, which I think is a really important one, is that we think, okay, a good decision will lead me to a positive outcome, and a bad decision will lead me to a crap outcome, which I've got to avoid at all costs. And
Mhm.
it's just not always true. And a less favorable outcome than what we hoped for doesn't necessarily mean we made a poor decision. There are factors we mentioned right at the start, factors beyond our control. So, just using a really boring example, but I think this is actually probably a really true one. I'm imagining some time ago, people were thinking, right, mortgage, I might need to go for a fix. What do I do? What can you do is make your decision on the best available information that you have. So, you do that with the best of intentions. And then maybe a few months down the line, you know, the economy has changed, politics has changed, the market's
Mhm.
perhaps nosedived, or it's done the opposite, and it's worked out not in your favor. And you think I made a bad decision, but actually you didn't. You were possibly just unlucky. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking back to the poor people who had to do their mortgages when trust was in, because what the hell happened then?
Yes, nothing to do with their decision-making abilities at all. But it's,
No.
yeah, although, making decisions always gives us some control over a situation, and yet there is always that which we can't control.
Yes, exactly.
And I think maybe in looking to make those good decisions, but we also trying to avoid anything that's painful.
Yes.
The right decision will feel good and it won't be uncomfortable. And yet sometimes a good decision might result in things getting worse before they get better. We're having to go through an uncomfortable patch, and so sometimes we make decisions that are right for us that piss other people off. And yet and we don't want that discomfort and pain of dealing with that.
Yeah.
So we worry that it's not a good decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's a natural human tendency, isn't it, to avoid pain. We don't want to inflict pain on ourselves or others,
Mm.
but actually it means we can be muddying the water, which leads me nicely on to our fifth trap, which is about the decision-making criteria that we
Mm.
are basing that decision on anyway. So this can apply to whatever the decision is. It's like, are you getting a little bit distracted with criteria that isn't the really crucial stuff, that isn't the stuff that's really important? So we overcomplicate it and we put in other factors. So, like other people's expectations, fear of judgment about what other people will think, about letting other people down. Like you said, Kirsty, this with this pain avoidance. So we put all these other things into the mix and make it more complicated, um, rather than focusing on what actually matters, which is often a lot more simple than we think, leading it back to things like our values and what's
Absolutely.
important to us. And because a decision that's in line with those is, I think, much more likely to be a true reflection of what's most likely to be the right decision for you than all of those other things being put into the mix.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think when you've got that conscious awareness of your core values and what it is that is most fundamentally important to you, those are such good criteria for simplifying the decision making process, which I'm
Mm.
one in favour, because I'm quite naturally a big overcomplicator of decisions and an overthinker, and that recognition of what is it that really matters to me in life and how does that apply in this situation certainly helps simplify that and then
Yeah,
cut through that noise of all the unnecessary and complicated criteria.
yeah. And in favour of keeping things simple, and have one more point to make. And this is going to
Mm.
sound like the reverse of what I've just said, but it's actually not. This is the what else question before you make a decision. So not what else in terms of extra criteria. This is in terms of extra information to inform the decision. Going back to what I was saying before about the best informed
Mm.
decision. And this is especially important, I think, in those sort of yes or no type decisions. For example, perhaps you had an interview for a role and perhaps you've been offered it. So the ball is now in your court to perhaps accept the role or decline the role. You know, you've got this sort of yes or no situation. And I think we often skip to, right, I now have to decide yes or no. And I like to think sometimes there is an opportunity for a pause first to think,
Oh, we like a
what
pause.
else?
Mm.
Yeah, we like a pause. Oh, yeah, we've spoken about that before. Because I think the pause allows you to process that thinking, because you might have a gut pull in one of those directions, which is great. But if you don't, I think you're looking for the extra bit of information that's going to tip those scales. So, for example, say it's a full-time role, but you know you'd really love to work 4 days a week and a bit from home, or whatever it might be. I'm just giving an example
Yeah.
here. That's a real good example of the what else, because if you don't try and find out what's possible, you're going to make a more half informed decision that's perhaps less likely to work out truly in your favor. So, for example, if you ask that question and it turns out they're absolutely rigid, it's a real no, no flexibility policy, you're going to have perhaps plugged a gap in your knowledge about the type of organization. And you might either be okay with that or not okay with that. So I think the what else, in the decision making, not in terms of extra criteria that's superfluous, but in terms of information to plug some gaps about that decision, rather than just feeling the pressure to decide based on what you know right now, make the decision yes or no. I always think, well, take a breath and think, do I know everything that I think I could know or would be helpful to help me make this? And I've used it myself, and honestly, it was to great effect. And I've helped a client with this too. And it was in literally in a job offer type situation, because she was thinking, do I accept? Do I not? And I said to her, well, what else? And she actually went back and asked, as opposed to just saying her yes or no. And it just leads you to it gives you that chance to go a little bit further down the line before committing, not because you're unable to commit, but you just want to commit wholeheartedly to that best informed decision.
That's really interesting. I mean, as you've described it there, what's come up for me is it's what else might be possible in this situation that I might not have seen. Is that
Yeah.
what you
Yeah,
meant?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, I like that.
I can literally see the cogs turning at the moment.
Yes, it's always very obvious when I'm thinking. If you were here, you would smell it as well. There's the smoke.
So a little fire burning.
Yeah. So that's when I'm burning. Oh, those thinking traps are really thought-provoking. Thank you. And as ever, before we get to the question, we've got quotes. Quotes.
Yes. So first one, Napoleon Bonaparte, nothing is more difficult and therefore more precious than to be able to decide.
Oh,
Which was quite a nice one of reminding us that it's actually a bit of a privilege to be able to choose, but rather than being so pressurized, let's try and take some of the pain out of some of that decision making.
that's very true, isn't it? The more decision-making opportunities we have, the more privileged we are, really. The more choices and opportunities you have in
Mm.
life, the better. Even if, like me, you might not necessarily particularly enjoy the decision-making process. It's funny, when we started talking about this as a topic, I got something through an email from Mark Manson, the author of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And not personally, I hasten to add, just a standard newsletter thing. But it seemed uncannily appropriate because there were three sentences at the top of it. It said, if you don't choose your values, others will choose them for you. If you don't choose your beliefs, others will choose them for you. If you don't choose how to use your time, others will choose it for you. And that tied in so beautifully to it was the first
Mm.
thinking trap, wasn't it? Around not making a decision is in itself a choice
Yeah,
and may not be what you hoped it would be in terms of getting you off the hook.
yeah, absolutely. And this one's an interesting one. This is Theodore Roosevelt. He said, in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing, the next best thing is the wrong thing, and the worst thing you can do is nothing. And that's interesting. And I think if you, I don't perhaps necessarily entirely agree, because sometimes the staying as you are might be the right thing. But I guess it's, as I kept saying, it's a moment of recognizing I have a choice. What will that choice be? And consciously making it, as opposed to letting, I think what he's sort of
Yeah.
implying is standing there frozen to the spot, not choosing. Whereas I guess what I'm trying to say is actively choose something. It might work out well, it might not. And it can involve choosing to stay where you are in the position or
Yeah,
situation that you are
absolutely.
in, but it's okay to then later on choose again. Um, but yeah,
And
I thought that was quite an interesting one.
I, yeah, I really like that. And that what you just said about choosing to stay where you are, that can be such an empowering thing to do, to say this is my choice. And maybe
Mm,
it's not ideal, maybe it's not perfect, but it's my choice and I'm making the best of it and dealing with it.
yeah.
Mm.
So let's end with our question.
Question.
So, I wanted to ask everybody if they could recognize perhaps one or more of those thinking traps that we've spoken about playing out for you. So, just to recap, there were six. So, there's the not deciding, the future predicting, the permanence of decision making, the good decision is good outcome, bad decision is bad outcome, the criteria on which we make it and the what else factor. So if you can identify with perhaps one or more of those, and believe me, one of the reasons I managed to come up with that list is because I have experienced them myself. So there's no criticism here. But now that you are aware, what might you be able to do about it? And for me personally, the what else one has been a revelation for me. And I thought, well, I've absolutely got to practice what I preach here because and it has been really valuable. And one of the reasons I've found it to be so useful is because I therefore feel less pressure on the whole good decision thing, because I'm thinking I couldn't really have done any more to help me make this decision. And it stops me in that awful procrastination loop where I won't make a decision because I think, well, what else am I now waiting for? I've got as much as I possibly can, and now it's down to me to choose, including the staying where I am. So that's been the biggest game changer for me. What about you, Kirsty?
I think it has probably been around the criteria and the whole piece around recognizing my core values and coming back to them with decisions. Now, how does that decision feel to me in terms of my core values? Is it in alignment with them? It is surprisingly powerful in creating that almost gut instinct decision. Because I'm struggling to find the right words here, but when you put your core values into the mix, very often there's that sort of moment of, oh yeah, it's not all the analysis and everything else. I was swayed towards this decision because of all the things that I was thinking, very much thinking, and I've got all these criteria I can overthink and overthink and overthink, and it's, how does it line up with that value? And it just goes, it doesn't. That's the problem. That's why it won't sit right. But it, rather than having to make that decision between sort of the whole logic and the gut instinct and whether, which one I should go with, it gives me something far more tangible to hang that decision on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if there's any way we can make it a bit simpler, then let's dive into that wholeheartedly, because then ultimately we're going to make some kind of choice, consciously or unconsciously, default or actively chosen, and then be responding to what comes out the other side. And it's like most things, the more you get used to doing it, hopefully the easier it becomes. And going back to one of your other episodes that we've spoken about, it's about your belief that you will be okay.
Yes.
No
You
matter
can
what that
cope with
decision is.
what comes out of that decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it goes well or whether it doesn't, you can cope with that, and you can make more
Yeah,
decisions going forward that you will also cope with.
exactly.
Powerful. Well, thank you very much for those thinking traps, Kathryn, and I hope it has given everybody lots to consider and that they're going to find their decision making so much easier going forward.
Brilliant. Right. I have got a couple of blogs. I will link those for you in the notes, and we will see you again soon for another episode.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Mission Imperfect.
Please visit the show notes for details on how to contact us and for any resources we may have on the topic discussed.
Until next time, keep being imperfectly you. No one does it better.